So this talk, as you know, will be introduced by Professor Daniele Pini, who is a current professor at second year GIOCA in urban planning, and by Francesca Sabatini, who is a GIOCA alumna and now current researcher at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. So as you know, this talk will have the theme of culture and the city and experiences of planning and participation. So we will see practical examples through the talk of our two hosts. If you have any questions, you can write them in the chat during the talk. And of course, we will also have a Q&A session at the end, so you will be free totally to open your mic and ask questions, and yes, so it will become as interactive as possible. Let's try to do that. So yes, if you are okay, we can start, and I leave the word to Professor Pini and to Francesca Sabatini.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. Together with Francesca, we decided to have a talk, to have a dialogue, let's say. We are two architects, planners from different generations, with different background, with different experiences. But both of us recognize that culture is becoming one of the main issues in urban planning and management today, together with the issue of the participation, better with the issue of managing the initiatives from bottom up. Culture and participation are two, I would say, must in urban planning today. I want to anticipate that for many reasons I am a little bit critical about that, but this depends on my age, this depends on my background and education. And but I would like to discuss with Francesca, based on the experiences she is carrying out, especially in Sicily, as far as I understand, how these bottom-up initiatives can modify, can make more efficient or can make more sensitive the urban planning procedures that are very complicated, that are full of technicalities. Very often these technicalities do not have any sense, but in any case they exist and they have to be taken into account. And how the bottom-up initiatives manage to modify some decisions or some choices that have been taken by the decision makers, the institutional decision makers. On my side, I would like to say a few words about culture in urban planning and about the concept of participation. Culture is becoming one of the main issues in the so-called Agenda 2030, which has been set up by United Nations. There was a very important conference, meetings of experts in Hangzhou that sets culture as one of the tools of a sustainable development. And on the other hand, UNESCO produced for the Quito UN Habitat meeting of 2016 a very important research on culture and city. Taking into consideration the experiences of all over the world is a very important study that shows how culture is interpreted in many different ways. But in any case, that shows that today, for instance, it is impossible to think of heritage protection and heritage conservation without thinking of a culture-driven development. So the issue is not very new indeed. Already, I will say that already in the 70s and 80s, the experiences of many European and North American cities shows that some institutions like theater and museum were becoming a fundamental element in the processes and the big projects of urban regeneration. Everybody knows the case of Bilbao, but I think it's more important to remember, for instance, the policy of François Mitterrand in France, with his 7 or 8 big projects that modified the shape of Paris in a way and made Paris a cultural capital. It's enough to remember the Grand Louvre, the Théâtre de la Bastille, and so on, and many others. There were huge investment, even from the economic point of view, without forgetting the previous Chirac investment, Saint-Petersburg, which has become synonymous of a new way of producing and consuming culture in the world, I'm saying. The Bourg was copied in many ways in many cities, even small-scale cities. There were buildings with multi-purpose buildings where cultural activities could take place. They were called like the small Bourg, for instance. Then, of course, came Bilbao, the Guggenheim Museum, that was a sort of explosion because the Bilbao Museum, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao really led to a dramatic and radical transformation of the city. But there are a lot of experiences like that. Someone said that the museums were the new cathedral of the 20th century. And probably it's true. Every city in Europe, every important city, has a new museum, has a new theater, as new landmark in their city centers. Well, on the other hand, in the same period, urban planning has to face a very urgent problem of improving the living conditions of the most derelict peripheries and in some cases also of the slums. The regeneration of the slum is a very old story. It comes back to the initial post-war period in many countries, colonial countries like Morocco, for instance, or other countries in South America, Latin America, where fundamental experiences of participation of local population were carried out by the international institutions in order to improve the living conditions in the slums and the bidonville and so on. But in the 70s, the issue became important even in Europe because of the reactions of local communities against the big urban renewal projects that were taking place in cities like Brussels, for instance, Paris as well, London. There were epical fights, you know, even in the street in Paris, for instance, for the renewal of the Beaubourg area, and in London for the Covent Garden regeneration, and so on. This protest and this important project were stopped by the local communities' protest. And new projects were established, taking into account of the protest of the people. But it was really in the United States in the same period that advocacy planning, that was the name, developed with experts and professionals, helping the local community to react against the urban renewal projects of the institutional urban renewal project by the municipalities or the states and whatever, with a new approach. That is, they not only protested against these projects that aimed at eradicate the local population to replace with other and more healthier population, but they proposed alternative to these projects. And I think that this movement of advocacy planning was extremely important. In Europe, it had a few followers, let's say. One of them was an Italian one, Giancarlo De Carlo, for instance, and another one was a famous one, was an Anglo-Swedish architect, Ralph Esking, that were famous because in the 70s they designed some important housing schemes with the real participation of the community that was intended to go and live in this quarter. In Italy, the Quartiere Matteotti Interni is famous because it was really designed in a continuous dialogue and continuous dialectic exchange of ideas with the local population and with the future inhabitants. Or else the quarter of Biker in Newcastle, the same, with a different approach, was designed and was built based on the experiences of contact and dialogue, continuous contact and dialogue with the future inhabitants. But more in general, in Europe and in Italy as well, in the 70s, participation became a part of the planning process. In Italy, there were the so-called consigli di quartiere or other political and local institutions. These experiences were soon forgotten, needless to say. Now they are back, and the participation becomes an obvious and mandatory step in every planning decision. I stop here because otherwise I would be very, very critical about the way participation is understood and carried out today. But this is another story. What I think is important is that in this general framework, people, local communities, associations understood that it's possible to question the decision taken by the city managers, taken by the planner, taken by the institutions, taken by the local government. In many cases, this reaction, I think, are extremely positive because they help improving very much the project. In other cases, someone can say that these reactions are negative because they stop the projects and because they are very often subject to some sort of politicization, which is true in a way. But the fact remains that it is impossible today to manage an urban planning process or to implement important urban planning, urban renewal project without listening to the people. I would say that, I mean, me personally, I was trained by Giancarlo De Carlo, who was one of the theorists of the participation. And I belong to a generation that is used to listen to the people, but listen to the people doesn't mean necessarily to do big meetings or to meet up or something like that. Listen to the people means also, and this is a personal suggestion, learning to look at how people uses the space, at how people lives in the space, and to understand what people needs. Not necessarily what people desire, because unfortunately people desire only what he knows and only what he has been taught to desire. It is important to understand what people needs, what are the necessities they have to improve their life, to live better. This is the objective of any planning experience. And in order to deal with this, it is important to have a critical eye. it is important to try to understand what doesn't work, what is going wrong, what is to be changed. So, I mean, I stop here. I think that in many cases, many experiences, growing from the bottom and going up towards the decision level, are born because of this desire, of this intention, of this necessity to understand what the needs are, what the opportunities are, and what the possible outcomes of a better use of the existing resources could lead to. I stop here, and I hope that Francesca will be able to.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot to react to, so I tried to take notes, but at the same time, I'll try to be as clear, linear as possible. Well, we both agree, I guess, that participation has been often instrumentalized, especially in recent times, as you were saying. It has become a buzzword sometimes of local administrations trying to somehow convince somehow funders sometimes, but also the people that they were being responsive to their needs. But I guess the key point of participation when it came out as a strategy for urban development was precisely that of creating planning processes that were more responsive to people's needs, whether that meant to actually have, round tables with local people to understand their needs, or even, as you were saying, listening critically and trying to understand what these needs might be, even without physically involving them, in the building process, in the planning process. What you were saying actually reminded me of a very famous scholar and urban planner, even though she wasn't technically an architect, whom you might know, who was Jane Jacobs, who in the 60s was among the pioneers of participation of a very somehow radical idea of planning, and she was using a very similar expression. She would say to keep an eye on the street. She was very among the pioneers, of listening to the people. Yeah. She was very active at the time in which the Greenwich Village in New York was actually shifting from a slum to an actual creative neighborhood, to a lively.
I think her book is still very important. I think that her book, Death and Life of
Great American Cities.
Exactly. Yeah. I think is still a very important book to read. 50 years after, yeah.
yeah. I mean, she was being very, very honest, and also I guess that she knew the limits of that as well, because there was, on the other hand, in the same period, I guess there was the Chicago School, on the other hand, which was having a very, top-down somehow approach to urban planning, which was a rival somehow to Jane Jacobs' approach. But what mattered was that they complemented each other. Like, these two approaches actually complement each other. The bottom up cannot, of course, be effective when, for example, thinking of constructing effective railroad systems. So there are things that participation cannot do, or at least there are things that to some extent cannot be fully developed with participation, starting from participation. But I guess that another expression that she used, which I'm particularly fond of, is the vital little plans. It's like she was mentioning, the vital little plans, which are fundamental to understanding what is the life that pulses across the streets. And that is here is Jane Jacobs, and the book is The Life and Death of Great American Cities. And speaking of the vital little plans that
excuse me, Professor Ferry is asking the name and the Jane Jacobs, and the title is Death and Life of
Great American Cities.
Of Great American Cities, exactly. See.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And well, speaking of that, actually, speaking of the way that these two different somehow processes, you know, the top down and the bottom up actually interact and intertwine. I remember always being struck by a chapter of Victor Hugo, Notre Dame de Paris, when he develops this gorgeous bird's eye view of Paris, and he is somehow able to grasp this complexity, this dichotomy, by using an expression which I will quote literally because I would not be able to remember it by heart. And he would say, speaking of Paris, of this bird's eye view of Paris, that there was nothing which did not possess its originality, its reason, its genius, its beauty. Nothing which did not proceed from art, beginning with the smallest house, with its painted carpet front, with external beams, elliptical door, to the Royal Louvre. And I really found it very riveting that he is making he's creating this contrast and somehow this parallel between the smallest house and the Royal Louvre. So he's identifying these two levels, which are actually still very relevant today, and which I guess are another point when addressing participation in processes of urban reactivation. The question at some point, and it's becoming even more relevant in these times, is whose culture and what culture? So there was a neat separation between highbrow and lowbrow culture, and therefore between the planning processes that were considered legitimate and the way people used the city and somehow created it from the bottom with their daily uses of the space, which was considered opposite until some point, and that has become to change, which has now become more critical to address. So the matter is far from new, as you were saying, because in making this opposition between the smallest house to the Royal Louvre, Victor Hugo was actually writing in the first half of the 19th century. And you were mentioning the great avant-gardes of urban planning in Paris, but actually one of the first urban planners, as you might know, as Professor Pini surely knows, was Haussmann, who during the reign of Napoleon III actually began the first massive urban planning
He was a préfet de police.
I'm sorry?
He was a préfet de police.
Yeah, yeah.
He was
of
not
course,
an architect and not even an engineer.
Absolutely. And even so, of course, like the impact that he had on planning was immense, because of course, like he privileged the first level, so the one of the Royal Louvre, to the one of course, small creative processes. So Hugo, who was writing before the advent of Napoleon III, was already somehow regretting the disappearance of the medieval city with its small creative fluxes, so with the ability of people to actually construct the city from the bottom. So what is interesting about the passage, I think, is that it already brings up a dichotomy which is still relevant today. And this is also, for example, significant in the sense that already in 2018, the somehow heir of Jane Jacobs, Richard Sennet, in his new book, Building and Dwelling Ethics for the City, mentioned this opposition between, the ville, which is the built environment, and the cité, which is the fluxes that actually construct the contemporary city. So there are the creative processes from the bottom, and then there are the processes of the built environment that somehow clash with each other, interact with each other in unexpected ways. Speaking of somehow contemporary, but not only contemporary planning processes, which have actually not exactly come to a failure, but still had controversial effects. I remember, for example, going to New York and being struck by two neighborhoods in particular. One which is right in front of the Hudson River, which is Brooklyn, the Dumbo district, which has been built on the former pier, and which somehow caused, even though it has surely regenerated the area, has caused some undeniable gentrification effects. So it has kept pushing, the poorer fringes at the margins, therefore causing, a two-sided regeneration effect. So on the one hand, the built environment was surely subject to an upgrading somehow of its value, but at the same time at an immense social cost. And the same thing is actually happening in Hudson Yards, which is another district of New York, which is being massively transformed with the privatization of public space and with with the construction of buildings which are occupied by banks and by other commercial activities, which somehow bring together people who can afford to consume. So there are controversies, of course, in the processes of both planning from the bottom up and of participation from the top down. Because on the one hand, of course, you have the top-down planning, which is insensitive to the social costs that it might cause, while on the other hand, of course, you also have controversial, fully bottom-up operations, such as occupations, for example, which can be considered the other end of the spectrum, you know, of participation, which you have a part of the population actually claiming ownership in somehow a violent way or a radical way of abandoned buildings, of unused buildings, and again, this tension is still very much alive today. Even in Bologna, Bologna has a very strong tradition in occupation, in the political and physical claiming of the buildings. One of the experiences that I wanted to mention today is, in fact, that of Laba, which is one of the collectives that is actually active here in Bologna, and which, however, has had a very different ending from compared to its beginning, because of course it occupied a former military building, a caserma in the city, and was later evicted violently by the administration. But what happened later was that with a massive political manifestation, the administration was then forced to give Laba one of its buildings in order for it to have a home again. And therefore, there was this rising from the part of the city, from citizens, which actually led to another appropriation, which was this time legitimate because it was given by the municipality. And in the former case, Laba was claiming that it had subtracted from material decay an abandoned building. And even today, it is occupying a building that was formerly devoid of whatever function, and is now providing services such as the language school for migrants, or a place for local farmers, for example, to hold a market. And another important activity that Laba is carrying out, and for which I actually volunteer, is this Tappeti Solidali, which is can actually be translated, I don't know, as maybe runners for solidarity, who actually grab their bike and sort of map the city to provide immediate medical assistance and some food to homeless people. Therefore, filling somehow an institutional void in the city, which is not answered by the local administration. So again, there are shades in the bottom-up processes, and there are also levels because Laba again started from a straightforward and illegal occupation, and it ended up, dealing with the local administration, with the municipal administration, to eventually create something bigger, to create a partnership somehow with the local administration to fill in some of the functions that the local administration was not actually fulfilling. Another experience, which is actually from the bottom up, which I have been observing for my doctoral thesis, is that of Danissimi, a neighborhood in Palermo, which actually I have been studying for different reasons, because it was one of the places in which Opera Camion took part. Opera Camion is another urban reactivation project in which a camion, that is a truck, literally stops in peripheral squares in different cities to perform opera for free. And therefore, thanks to Opera Camion, thousands of people have now been able to actually experience opera literally in their backyard. for 4 years now. But when it arrived in Danissimi, something very different happened, because the local population there claimed that if the theater had only stopped there for a night performing Opera Camion, it would have been a shopping window, a way to display how merciful they were somehow to the periphery, and asked that something more were done for the local community, for the neighborhood. And that's a participative event which actually ran for a year, and in which the local population actually was turned somehow in the choir of the opera project. I have just a couple of pictures to show, and I would love to show it to you right now. So this is the neighborhood Danissimi. You can see it's marked in this olive green, and it's a very it's a central neighborhood in the city. So it's somehow odd that it can be considered a periphery and a disadvantaged area, but it has a school dropout rate of 60% and an unemployment rate of 90%. So it has a very critical situation also in terms of drug dealing. But since 2013, it actually begun a bottom-up process, literally starting from scratch, from the people, and from a very active, actually, Franciscan friar who leads communication with the municipality to actually reactivate the area. So you can see from here that Danissimi is literally a urban void. So it's if it's not a periphery in the geographical sense, it is in the cognitive sense of the word. And yet, what they have actually been doing since 2013 was opposing some of the actions of the municipality, which, for example, wanted to build a parking lot in the area in order for it to actually regenerate, in their view, the neighborhood. But they opposed this construction and asked, on the contrary, that the place be given in loan for use to the community, so that they could actually build what they built, that is a farm, a community farm. And they have been using some 8 hectares of land to plant a vegetable garden that they're actually sort of collectively using today. After this first phase of appropriation, what they actually did was engaging with the local arts institution. So in the time in which they established somehow the agency of the community, and in a time in which they knew they had somehow a bargaining power with the municipality, they then started the local institutions in the area and started developing a social museum of street art, which you can see in the second picture there on the right. And again, some participative projects, artistic projects, for example, with the Teatro Biondo, which is another theatrical institution in the city, with the Teatro Massimo, which developed the Opera Camion project, which you can see on the left. And if you want, I can also show you a very short clip of like a minute and a half, if that might, if that can be done. I don't know if Susanna and Leonardo will.
Yeah, it's perfectly okay. I would suggest you maybe to turn off your video, because at least I have some connection issues. Like sometimes I hear you in lagging, so maybe while you show the video, maybe turn off your camera.
Okay.
Un po' del suo coraggio a morire sereno, di siccome ottengo pietà potrei trovare un suo capitoliano. Perché per mia guerra renderà, siamo per il mio,
So you could see the people singing. You can see that it was held actually in the main square of the neighborhood, which is also where they actually run their daily activities, such as farming. And what I think is interesting about this participation project and process is that it was then scaled up to an active collaboration with the municipality. So in the moment in which, of course, there has to be a broader engagement of resources, participation by itself is not sufficient, of course, because that is the point of governance and of having multi-scalar projects. And therefore, there was this somehow sharing of the governance process between the local administration, the artistic institutions, and the community, which resulted in a very effective reactivation process, which has been ongoing for the past 8 years, and which I think was worth mentioning when it comes to participation. Another project to which I took part with the Department of Architecture of the University of Bologna was 2 workshops of co-design with the students of Bologna and Bogota for the reactivation of 2 dismissed railroad areas, one in Bologna and one in Bogota. The one in Bologna is actually becoming pretty well known. It goes by the name of Dumbo today. So it's Urban Metropolitan District of Bologna. And again, it was basically dismissed from the moment in which the transport of merch via railroad became unpopular, of course, because it was substituted by more effective means of transporting goods. And from that moment on, it was subject to a progressive. It has attracted the attention of the local administration. It was supposed to be demolished in order to build some more, to build housing there. But now it's being subject to regeneration through temporary events and through a co-participated process of regeneration, not much with the local population, but rather with the different creative actors of the city of Bologna. So it has been the location for some festivals and some events, and at the same time, it is now being curated by different groups of creatives, such as Open Group, Eventeria, and now the local project of Bologna Attiva, which is co-created with the municipality, has just been inaugurated. Actually, the inauguration was supposed to be today. I don't know if it has been possible due to the storm that we've just had, but the process is ongoing, and it's going to surely have an effect that is still hard to calculate, because it's going to alter some of the mechanisms, of course, of the local neighborhood. It is located sort of in an in-between between the periphery of Bologna and the city center, because it's right outside the city walls, very close to another active social center and formerly occupied building, which is TPO here in Bologna, and it's going to activate some very interesting dynamics, I guess, with the urban fabric and with the creative processes of the city. The twin project that we actually worked on with the University of Bologna was in Bogota again, and I will show again some of my pictures. So the area is a lot more disadvantaged than the one in Bologna. It is characterized by very strong poverty and crime rates, and it's called La Estación de la Sabana. You can see why it's called La Sabana, because it's a very flat part of the city of Bogota, in which there are some very informal buildings and activities that are run by local people, a lot of indigenous people, and again, this massive railroad area, this station that was progressively abandoned because the whole public transport system fell into disuse with the massive construction of a road system for cars, for private transport. the Estación de la Sabana, therefore, is this immense and huge building, which has been devoid of function for years, which has become the museum of the police station and the police station itself, but is now being reactivated again with cultural activities, and in particular with a sort of functional mix. There are these this adaptive reuse of the disused building, which is being shared by a foundation which is called Estación Cultural de los Oficios, which is supposed to preserve the craftsmanship of local people. And then they are holding there some theatrical activities that both pertain to the performing arts in a more classical sense and to the circus. And even so, the spaces are literally immense, and they are now considering to further expand this functional mix to include some commercial areas, for example, or a museum, again, here of the railroad system of Bogota. So the dialogue here again is very much open because the area is still being regenerated right now. But it still has like some positive results even today in Bogota. So I don't know if Professor Pini is still there. I don't know if you can hear me, if you're having problems with my connection.
Oh, good.
No, all good.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So again, like what I've been trying to show with these experiences, of course, my experience is a lot less broad than Professor Pini's, but like I had the possibility of experiencing a very different spectrums of participation again. So from the full bottom-up experience of Laba and what they've been doing for homeless people, their progressive transformation from a radical center into a collaborative environment with the municipality, with the experiences of Denisini, which was actually a project developed from the bottom, which was actually sensitive to the necessities of the local population, because it was the local population which actually developed it. While in a second step, coming to terms with the municipality and with other cultural actors in the area in order to actually construct a broader collaborative environment in order to bring further the reactivation of the area to some more institutionalized projects that were the Obras workshops that were held in Bologna and Bogota, and which are leading again to a progressive regeneration of the area, which is still coming, so to speak, from the top. So from the interest of both the municipality and the university, but which is still trying to be very responsive of the genius loci, to quote a Latin expression, a very to be very sensitive again of what was there, of the memory of the places, while imagining new uses and new flexible uses for the area. So again, I hope Professor Pini will not be too critical of these experiences.
No. I would like only to make an observation, just to have a discussion about that. I think that these experiences are very interesting and should be multiplied. I think it would be very positive to multiply these initiatives. The question I make is not a question, it's just an observation based on experience. That if you want to give, to make these experiences sustainable and continue through the time and have in the end a real effect, they have to have an institutional hook, no matter about that. And the risk is that once they have this institutional hook, they are becoming institutionalized. And believe me, there's no worst thing that could happen to have a spontaneous initiative becoming institutional. I don't want to make any political statement on any political point, but the experience says that this process is very, very dangerous. So I think that since the beginning, we have to be very aware, you know, to find the right connection with institutions, to find the right way to ensure even economic sustainability to these experiences. Otherwise, they are lost and in the end are forgotten or almost useless. This is my issue. I think that in many cases there is I could say, a sort of a romantic approach, which is probably necessary, a voluntary approach, which is absolutely necessary and positive. But this should be little by little, maybe with, there is a problem of leadership, there is a problem of representation, I don't know. But in any way, there is a problem of finding the way to make these experiences replicable and sustainable through the time. In French, there is a word which I like much more than durability, which is durabilité. Voilà. I think the real issue, a real problem is to make this experience durable.
They have to last somehow.
Have to last.
Make them last, absolutely.
Because only lasting they can grow, they can find a good management, and the management, I think, will be found on the way. Is not pre-existing. Otherwise, they're not so spontaneous.
No, what struck me, I'm sorry if I interrupted you. What struck me about Daniele Pini, and I'll be very curious to see its developments, is that it's been lasting for 8 years, which of course do not make it sustainable, 100% sustainable, but still, it's interesting. It offered me a longitudinal perspective. I could see how it was transformed from a project that actually answered a sheer necessity of a people to actually survive with other means than falling prey to drug dealing. So there was this first movement that answered to sheer necessity, which then switched to somehow sharing the symbolic meanings and to also involve the local institution while keeping a very strong local agency. So they were able to actually let cultural institutions in at their own conditions.
Yes.
And what will be interesting to observe is the whether, of course, it will last or not. If they will be able. What is also interesting is that in the third phase that they actually identified in their experience is that they are now an NPO. The Daniele Pini NPO was born, I think last year. And they, through this NPO, they're able, of course, to better reach funds, for example, to develop their own activities. They were able, for example, to negotiate with Airbnb that the tourist tax be devolved to activities in the neighborhood. And they were able to build to buy a small truck with these funds, with which they're able to actually have a social restaurant, having catering services in the city. So they're still very sensitive to the issue of what they are, what they want to become, how they can answer needs of their own community before, falling prey again to the instrumentalization of a local administration. But what I think is the actual challenge is like, how do you scale against such projects? Again, it bounces me back to what you were saying, like how it is replicable with, for example, communities which are not as strong, which do not have like such a strong voice. Because another problem of participation, I guess, is precisely this one, that the risk is also to involve people who are already motivated, who are already informed, and that therefore you do not really create a very diverse range of voices in the participation process.
Okay, so I think we can ask questions and then close.
Yeah.
Huh?
Thank you very much. And I think that like Pauline wanted to say something, like she just left some messages in the chat because she had to leave. But I don't know if someone else in the room would like to have any question or observations or anything else.
Yeah, actually, I'm still here, but I have to leave like in 2 minutes. So I left the article in the, wait, I can put the video. I just left an article in the chat because I thought it could be just interesting. I read it today and I thought, oh, this is about the theme of today. So I left it. It's happening in Newcastle and it's a urban room. So I just read half of it, but it's like, I'm just not sure if it's really bottom up or actually top down, because it's the municipality and the university that are creating this urban room in the center to inform and involve the citizens in the projects that are going on in the city, in the constructions, etc. So that's it. I left it in the chat and now I have to leave, but thanks a lot for the meeting and the presentation. It was really, really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you. Feel free to catch up. I'd love to have a talk on whatever feedback or questions you might have.
Yes, thank you for the article. Unfortunately, this is the kind of project I don't like too much. I don't think it has very much to do with the bottom up, but is a typical postmodern design, you know, that is made just to cherish the public, you know, and to make to look for an easy consent, you know, from the public. But this is my personal view, you know.
No, but this is among the dangers that we were.
I know, no, that's why
it might be instrumental.
Because I know the architect. That's the problem I have. That's all.
I cannot intervene on that.
It's a problem between architects. That's all. Okay.
I have a question, if I may ask. So, yes. Thank you so much, Professor Pini and my friend Francesca.
Yes.
I'm so happy to be reunited after so many years. It's so nice to listen to you again. It was a very valuable lecture and I really enjoyed it. My question is about, I'm wondering if you have heard about the new European Bauhaus. It's a new project that is introduced by the European Union. And of course, you might know the details better than me, but they're aiming to create a sustainable environment for the future of Europe. And I think in the longer run, they want to introduce new standards in order to create these long-term goals, which is also in line with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And when you look at the nature of the EU, you see that it's an intergovernmental and also supranational organization. Therefore, we might not be able to mention about a bottom-up approach, but this is totally top-down. However, there are so many sub-programs within this scheme. And with a budget, they encourage cultural makers and people to apply for projects and so on. So how do you see this project? How do you see the scheme? And do you think in the longer run, this approach would create achieving sustainability, or do you think there are glitches in the system? How do you see it as professionals in the field?
I don't know. The project seems very, very interesting and very serious. I hope it will be successful. And what can I say? It's a project that puts in evidence some real important issues, you know, instead of thinking that the only possible option is the development and the growth and so on. It is a project that, for instance, 2 years ago, explored the issues of the shrinking cities, which is a very peculiar issue in East Germany, you know, for instance, where the cities do not have any energy to grow, but they have to shrink. And so what is the correct strategy to shrink instead of developing? This was a few years ago when they addressed the issues in Weimar, for instance. I think, I don't know the recent development of the project, but I think that it is very important also for another reason, because they reconnect to the original Bauhaus experience that I would like to remind is extremely important, because Bauhaus reflected a holistic vision of culture, an holistic vision of architecture, design, and so on, that it is extremely important, especially today, you know, in a world of Archistar, in a world of image, in a world of, could I say, useless performances in a way. I think that go back to seriousness, to study, to research, to concern, and so on. It's a very important. It's very important, especially for architects, but not only for architects in general, I would say. So I hope the project will succeed, and I don't know. I don't know what to say. We can only hope.
Exactly. I mean, this is also my approach to it as well as a cultural manager. So it looks quite exciting, but at the same time, you cannot anticipate what kind of results it would bring in the future. Because again, as you mentioned many times in this lecture, there are so many dangerous situations that can occur, and they're not necessarily intended. So it's a very fragile process indeed. And it's really important how it actually gets reflected on the actual public, who are the first-hand layer of the society who experiences that particular space. So
sure,
I'm really curious how it's going to turn out. But so far, it looked quite nice.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yeah. It is very interesting. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
As Professor Pini was saying, the reference to Bauhaus, so like heading back to the roots of such an important milestone for architecture, I think is a considerable reference per se. And
yes,
and what I really think that the European Union did well, you know, when conceiving even the structure of their calls, which I think might sound a little commonplace now that we're all a little bit into that, but it's not, is that they're always thinking about a multi-scalar involvement. So you have the you have research, you have the word of research, and then the word of entrepreneurship. So again, it sounds commonplace, but it's actually an approach that aims to bring together different you know, professional profiles, different interests in order to construct a complex, you know, project environment. And I think that this, in the first stance, was a great contribution, you know, of the European Union and of its funding programs to expanding the debate, you know, beyond the fully top-down or even the fully bottom-up approach. You know, it's this idea of hybridizing the role of project making was very significant. Again, the only thing I can say is like aligning with you on hoping it will go well, but so far it seems very promising to me as well. And to sponsor me a little bit, I just published an article with some co-authors from the University of Bologna on the role that the ROC project, which has just ended in Bologna, might play in implementing the new European Bauhaus perspective and policies. So I can send you the link to that once we're done. But
I'm really curious.
I'm very happy. I'm very happy that you're here, by the way. It's so great to see you.
Same. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Oh, we are few people left.
Very few, but good.
Yeah, exactly. The best one.
It was very interesting. Yes, it was very interesting. Thank you very much. And yes, like if we want to keep going the conversation in our like groups, or like if you want to share the paper, Francesca, for example, feel free to do that. And yeah, I think we could try and keep it going. Yeah, on our socials.
Yeah. So thank you so much, and I'll call it a day.
Thank you to you all, and I'm very happy to see you again, especially Dikle. That where are you now?
I'm based in Rotterdam now. I live and work in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, then.
Thank you so much for everything. Again, it was so great to see you. And thanks to Susanna and Leonardo, whom I don't know very well, but this was a great chance to reconnect with GIOCA after years. So thanks.
Thanks to you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye, have a nice
See
evening.
you again. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow, thank you so much.
Ciao.